am Zoe, and I am from Paranormal Extraction. And yes, today we have a great guest. We have Paul Askoff with UFOs, The Real Story. And that actually just came out today, or yesterday, I can't remember. It's either today or yesterday. But you can find his book on Amazon and go ahead and read it. It's fantastic. Now, I haven't read the book, but I have talked extensively with Paul, and today we have the opportunity to welcome Paul about his UFO, The Real Story. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Zoe. How are you?
Thank you so much for coming on today and being a guest on the show. And Paul, so the book actually came out today or yesterday? I was confused.
Yeah, whatever. I think I was told it was going to be tomorrow, but I've heard today that it was yesterday. So it's out now anyway, Zoe. But thank you for the welcome, and it's nice to be here.
That's great. Now, hey, Paul, tell us a little bit about your background, because I was really impressed with that. Your personal background.
Yeah, I've been in the medical field all my life, 47 years in the medical field. A qualified nurse, general nurse, a qualified occupational health nurse, a qualified paramedic, and for the last 7 years as a trauma coordinator for the Yorkshire area, where we were used as a clinical advisor, and we dealt with the original SARS pandemic, and then we also dealt with MERS, and then Ebola, Zika virus, and now I took early retirement, and my colleagues are now dealing with the latest debacle of coronavirus, but there you go.
Yes, we did talk about the coronavirus, and we'll get into that maybe at a later time if we have enough time, about your thoughts about that, because that was quite incredible. Now, tell everyone where you're from, because this is great.
Where I'm from Yorkshire in England, right in the centre, in a city called Leeds. I live quite near there, and I've lived here all my life.
Wow. I mean, so we're talking, right now it's what, like 6 o'clock at night?
Yes, that's correct. It's just come.
Oh, wow. Okay. Geez, I was right on with that one. So, hey, Paul, tell me a little bit about, well, not a little bit, tell me about your experiences with the UFO and the paranormal. Now, everybody, I want to let you know that Paul's story is very unique and very, very different. It has a kind of a little bit of a scientific approach along with some spiritual, bringing some spiritual components into it, and his story as well. But I find it very fascinating and very interesting. And actually, out of all the UFO books that I've actually ever read, I've never heard of a philosophy such as his. So this will be very interesting to all of you UFO fanatics. So tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Well, my experiences started when I was 11 years old, and we had been out. My father was very strict, and myself and my brother, the last job of the day was taking our dog for a walk and the neighbours, and we had come back in. As a child then, it was just after my 11th birthday, and I was an avid reader. I used to read a lot all the time, but I'd never read anything on UFOs. And as we came back, we'd taken the dogs, come back, we went outside, my father was in the front garden, and we lived on the edge of a very small village, so there was no light pollution. I'm talking 1968, so it's a lot of years ago. No light pollution. You could see the sky wonderful for the stars. And this night, we were saying good night to Dad before we went to bed. And as we went out in the front garden, we were saying good night. And it was just becoming dusk. To the north, the sky was covered in cloud, but to the south, it was completely clear. A few of the stars were coming out, and my father had a telescope. Now, he wasn't an astronomer or anything, but he was interested, and he liked us to be interested too. As we're looking at the sky and he's pointing out the first few constellations and stars that are beginning to appear, and all three of us were looking at the sky, 2 UFOs came out of this bank of cloud really quickly and then just stopped dead. There was no deceleration. They were instantly still. They were still for a few seconds, and then they moved at 90 degrees from where they first came out, away from us, until they disappeared in the distance. We had them in sight maybe for 1.5 minutes in total, I would think, at the most. But when they came out of the cloud, they were intensely bright, really like a pearly white. And when they stopped, you could actually see the light from them shining on the surface of the cloud that were nearest to them. The other thing which happened at the time, and questioning my father and my brother afterwards, and since it happened, I got a voice in my head that said, quite clearly, that said, oops, we hadn't meant to have been seen. Now, I was the only one out of the three of us that got that quite clearly. And when they were still, these 2 balls of light were perfectly circular, perfectly spherical. And then as they moved away from us, there was the tiniest, like a teardrop shape at the back of them formed, almost like a vapor trail, if you like, but really tiny. You could only just see it. And throughout, it was absolute silence. No sound whatsoever came from them. There were no apparent appendages or other lights, no apparent rotation or anything. They were just brilliant pearly white light. And we were all three stood, or agape, if you like, looking at the sky, and it was being quiet. Nobody said anything. And when they'd eventually disappeared into the distance, my father was the first to speak, and he just said, there's nothing that we have that can do that. And that was initially then it was like, how can I wanted to know the nuts and bolts behind it. How can something move as they did? How can something move like that? How can something be so obviously, for want of a better term, alien? And I don't know about it. Why isn't it on the news channels? Why isn't it in the newspapers? Why does nobody talk about it? Mm-hmm. And it was so obvious, that's what got me hooked. Because you couldn't put it down. I mean, there were no helicopters, police helicopters or ambulance helicopters as there are now. In those days, there weren't any helicopters, it was whoa, really sort of mind-blowing for me.
Now, after that happened, it says that...
So there you go. So that's what got me into it.
Okay, so am I muted?
That's what started my experiences.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
No.
Would you like me to continue?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
Fine now.
Something happened. You were on mute for some reason. All of a sudden, don't worry about it, but all of a sudden. Yeah, so tell me. So after this experience, you really were interested into the UFOs, and then you started reading about it. What happened from there?
Yeah, I was, as I said earlier, I was an avid reader. But one thing that happened then was I couldn't find books on UFOs, and it was really difficult. And being in a small village, I mean, yes, we had the local library, but they certainly didn't stock anything like ghost stories or books on UFOs or anything like that. So as a youngster then, I had to try and get the local railroad or the local bus company into the big cities to try and even find a bookstore that would even sell books on UFOs.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't easy then.
Oh, wow. Okay, so then you became an avid reader. Now, you had another experience as well. What was that experience?
Well, I had several seen UFOs, but the next thing that I recollect that happened was where our home was. We only lived about 100 yards away from a spiritualist church. Now, I was reading books on UFOs all the time, and I was trying to collect them and making my own library. And as I'm reading these, obviously I'm growing up as a teenager, and as we're all aware, as teenagers, you're not interested in church, you're not particularly interested in your parents even, you have your own life. And as teenagers, especially as we're getting older, you're more interested in, shall we say, young ladies or cars and motorcycles and sports, things like that. And that tends to take over your life. And I was actually, the spiritualist church was about 100 yards away from our home. So anywhere we went, we had to walk past. And one day I'm walking past the spiritualist church to go meet some friends. And outside was this old guy, and he was stood there in a three-piece suit, smoking a cigarette. And as I'm walking by, he said, "Excuse me, Paul, have you got a minute?" And I don't think I actually spoke, and I walked up to him. And he said, "Just a minute." And he got this scrap of paper out of his pocket and a little pen. And he wrote on it, and he showed me what was on the piece of paper. And he'd written 3 letters, and it said UFO. And I sort of looked at him quizzically, and he just said, "I've been given a message, I've been told by Spirit to tell you that you're thinking along the right lines." And that was it.
Wow, and that was from someone you didn't even know.
No. Now, talking afterwards, I just assumed that he knew my parents. But apparently, my father afterwards said, "Well, we know him, but we don't particularly talk to him." But he was a medium that frequented that church and had the message to pass forward to me.
Wow, what a story that is. That's interesting. Yeah. So isn't there another one that also that happened to you? There was one more, wasn't there?
Well, what happened, I did a healing, quite by chance. Now, again, as teenagers, you don't particularly, well, we didn't go to church. When you're youngsters, you just go wherever your parents take you. But as we all mature, we all go our own paths in life, and I just believe I was just a normal gawky teenager growing up as we all do. And we used to go to church mainly for things like weddings and funerals and Christmas and Easter, and that was about it. And this day I was there, and my father said, one of the old mediums there was called Betty, and he said, "Betty wants to see you." So I'm like, I don't want to get involved with the church really, but anyway. So what happened? I just went and I thought, right, be polite, do the right thing, respect your elders. And I went to church this day, and I'm speaking, and Betty was there. And she says, "Paul, I've got a little job for you." So I'm thinking, does she want me to help in the garden or this sort of things, like you would with a reasonably fit young man, So anyway, he said, "I want you to go and see Pearl." Now, as it happened through friends, we knew Pearl. And she had a daughter who was lovely, a stunning girl. So I thought, this is a really good excuse that I'll be able to see the daughter. So there's always this undercurrent of, all right, I could be doing myself a favour. So I said, okay, I'll go and see Pearl. So she'd only lived a few villages away, so we'd get the local transport, get on the bus, and go off. And I'd go and knock on the door. And it turned out the daughter wasn't there anyways, but I found out later that this lady suffered from quite debilitating migraines, and she'd be almost bedridden for 3 or 4 days at a time. So I went in, didn't know why or anything whatsoever, and I kind of just point out that I'd never attended the spiritualist church as for any of the, what they called it, development circles, to develop as a medium or anything like that. So I didn't know anything of that side of mediumship or spiritualism. Anyway, she opened the door, this Pearl, lets me in, and the whole house was in darkness, all black, all the curtains were closed, and I went into this quite a large lounge, this big old house, and in the centre of the room was a high chair, a bit like a carver, like a dining chair. Mm-hmm. And she went and sat on the chair with her back to me. And then I swear to God, as my judge, that it was like somebody else took over my body, like I was being, I don't know, coerced, something took over me. And I walked up to the back of her, and she just sat there saying a prayer, didn't even look at me. And I walked up to the back of it and put my hands on her shoulders until she'd finished. And then it was like I was being guided, if you like, or steered to do something. And I was finished up in this bizarre position when I'm stood at the back of this pearl, one hand up in the air next to the ceiling, and the other hand hovering just, my left hand, just above her head, about an inch above. And then it was almost like somebody had switched on an electrical current. And this electrical current passed from up wherever, down through my arms and into the top of her head. And I felt it physically, the vibration of it, physically the power going through me. So by then I'm thinking, I daren't move, I daren't do anything in case I disturb it. So I'm just trying to stay still and not change anything, if you like. And then after about no more than a minute, it suddenly stopped and I physically felt it switch off. It just finished. And I knew it finished and I knew whatever it was, that was it. And I rested my hands back on her shoulders. And then she sort of leaned forward and turned round and looked at me. And she said, my word, you hide your light under a bushel. Now, as a teenager, I didn't even know what that meant.
Right.
And she then got up, opened the curtains, put the kettle on, and 10 minutes later I was walking out the house thinking, what on earth just happened, you know? And again, I think retrospectively, it was, shall we say, a gift that I was shown that I had no idea about, but I was shown it that this is how it could be, you know, this is what you're capable of, or what anybody's capable of for that matter.
Well, that's that's an absolute fascinating story. Now, do you think by you having your experiences with these, which you're talking about the UFOs and reading about UFOs, do you think that that experience has anything to do with it, or was that more of a paranormal or supernatural thing that happened to you?
Yeah, I agree. So I think that was more paranormal. However, what it led me to believe with studying UFOs, doing research, doing investigations, which I did later for Bufora, it helped me to, if you like, develop a theory to tie it all together.
That's
now,
right.
I believe that everything is connected through the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right. Now, let's get into that a little bit. Now, this gets a little...
Ask him.
This gets a little hairy on this. What would you like me to ask him?
What does hide your lights under a bushel mean?
What does hide your lights under a bushel mean?
It's an old saying that you don't show your true colours. You know, you keep your secrets to yourself, type of thing.
Nice.
Okay.
Sorry, does that explain it?
Yeah.
Okay, that explains it. Anyways,
Cool.
he threw me off track. Please
Sorry,
don't do that again.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Anyways, now
I did.
I would like you to discuss. Now, this is really this concept that you have of this electromagnetic field. Is that what we're talking about? Did I get the right word on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That is just something that is, it's more of a spiritual approach of different levels is the way I saw it, but I'm going to go ahead and let you explain it because it's very hard to get it in your brain when you're speaking about this. And I think that's why the book would be so good to read, because there would be, you know, it would be more clear to do rather than us speaking. So I hope you can bring this across as best as you can, because it's very interesting. So okay.
Yeah. Well, if you imagine we have the electromagnetic spectrum around us all the time now. Each person has their own magnetic field. The chair which we sat on, the computer we're looking at, even the building that surrounds us and the room that we're in, all have a magnetic field. Now, to a limited extent, we're real beginners at this, and we're only scratching the surface, but we're beginning to understand how it works and how to measure it. Not that we can control it particularly, but we know and science has known for quite some time that we have the higher frequencies, we have radio waves, and then as it gets less, it comes down through the infrared, and then you come to the visible light that we can see, and the acoustic spectrum that we can hear, and then as you go further down, there's the ultraviolets, and then X-rays, and then gamma rays. Now that is what our accepted science use now, and it's just different frequencies, different wavelengths from the high to the low. And we can only see this tiny, tiny fraction in the middle. The visible light and the acoustic spectrum that we hear is actually less than 1/10 of 1%. Now that is of the known matter, our ordinary matter and energy that surrounds us now. The scientific community, these cosmologists and astrophysicists and people with much better brains than I, they're bandying about figures now of dark energy and dark matter, making up by far the majority of energy that's available in the universe. So they're saying figures as much as between 75 and even as much as 95% of the energy that's available in the universe is this dark energy and dark matter. Now, we're not even aware of that. I mean, to be fair, we're not even aware of most of our own spectrum, never mind another one.
Right.
So we're only, as humans, naturally, we are only aware of 1/10 of 1% of the 5% of energy in the universe. So can you see how such a tiny, tiny amount that we normally see? And I believe that the spiritual realms and especially the UFOs, if I can use the word, because people refer to them in all different ways, and I'll just say ET, a broad term if you like for now. People call them visitors or aliens or whatever you wish. But if I just said use ET. Now, you imagine 100 years ago, where you are now, 100 years ago, if you were very, very fortunate, you may have a motor vehicle. Otherwise, people used the railroad or you had a horse. End of story. That was it. So if you look how far we've come now, with people having their own vehicles, motorcycles, and if you do really well, you may even have your own aircraft or helicopter. But we have all the modern technology that goes with it, the internet, all our ways of communication, and we take all this for granted. And that's just in the last 100 years. Now, to take that a step further, you imagine an alien race, ET, who may have been around 1,000 years longer than us, maybe even 10,000, who knows? So somebody who could be 1,000 to 10,000 years in front of us, they are absolute masters of and understanding of the whole of the electromagnetic spectrum, not just the 5% that we know about, but the 95% that we don't know about. And that is why they, if you wish, they bamboozle us with science and all the rest of it, because they are complete in control of it, and we're not. We're not even scratching the surface of it yet.
Well, okay, yes, I agree with you, and that's such an amazing way of letting people know. I mean, it's almost like I'm just baffled sitting here listening to you, because it's the concepts that you're bringing up are very scientific, a scientific approach. Am I wrong on that one, or is that? I mean, it sounds like science. I mean, you know a lot about science here. This isn't just somebody going up in a UFO and having an experience. This is taking years for you to understand all of these different, they're not even theories, but they're actual realities of the different levels of being. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you see, now if you imagine the way that I can put it across by using different analogies that people may understand. You know the old vinyl records we used to get on the old Wurlitzer record players? So they're the old vinyl records with the hole in the centre,
Right.
and they're a flat disc with the tracks on them. If you imagine one record as the 5% of the electromagnetic spectrum that we deal with, That is what we are familiar with. We work, or our planet and everything around it is on that one LP. Okay? Now, imagine dark energy and dark matter as there isn't just one LP, which we are, that's the one we're aware of, but we're in the middle of a whole stack of records. So there's lots of them, there can be dozens of them. And therefore, by tuning their frequency, ET is able to come down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many records, to our level and interact with us. And that's the same why I say it gets involved with spirit and mediumship and that sort of thing, because the mediums, and in the right circumstances and the right place, are able to tune maybe to the record above or the record below. And that's how you get the paranormal phenomenon. The difference is, it's just the frequency or the vibration, where ET is our masters of it. They're able to control it. I mean, that goes from their movement, from abductions, anything. They know exactly what they're doing. They control what we can remember. They can control where we go. And it's all connected through the electromagnetic spectrum. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It's very overwhelming. Now why would they control it? Is it because they're at the very top, as you're saying, at the very top of this electromagnetic spectrum, and that what I'm getting is that we're kind of all the way at the bottom. And so since they have all these different levels, it's like having different levels of consciousness that we haven't developed yet. So it's more, for me, it's more of a spiritual thing. Whereas you develop each level of consciousness, then you become a greater being at almost like they're manipulating things. Are they manipulating us? Is that what's going on?
Well, they could be, certainly, yes. Now, let me just take the analogy further then for you, Zoe. Imagine the LP or the stack of records, if you wish. So if you imagine the hole in the centre of that record where you would put it on the thing to play it, the hole in the centre is purity, what some people would call God, okay? And the edge of the record is evil. I'm not saying there's such a thing as the devil, but all those grooves where the tracks that play the music, if they are a life, one of your lives, so you are somewhere on your record, on that plane, at that vibration, having or experiencing that groove, which is your life at the time. And that is why people do not remember where they're from or the purpose. Because if you knew what you were doing, that would obviously defeat the object. And the idea is that by your own efforts, you raise your game, you raise your ethics, your morals, how you react to your friends, family, and people around you. And so therefore, it's by your own efforts that you progress towards the centre of the record. Now, to take it a step further, that's why religion is man-made. God never wrote anything down. So whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Buddhist, whether you're Mormon, whether you're Jewish, it's totally irrelevant, because it's exactly the same distance to the centre of the record, whatever religion you are. And we all know that you do get good and bad people in all religions. So religion is man-made, and religion may or may not help you depending on your personal ethics and morals and how you treat those around you. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. To me, it sounds like a spiritual journey, and that it's unique. Yeah. It's unique to each one of us, that we all want to get to the center of the record, the whole. And so we're all at different levels of consciousness as we're going through life. And we would like to get to the center. And the center now, is the center of the whole, is that where the ETs are? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay, so
E.T.
okay,
Just to explain, E.T. have exactly the same, if you want, it's an unwritten universal law. They are on their own record, whether it be the one above us or 10 records above us. So they're on their own plane, and they too have to abide by that law. And that, I think, is, in a way, when you look at abductees, if I may go on to that for a second,
yes,
how different people throughout time that we know of reported abductee cases, and wherever you are in the world, you do get differences. So we tend to go through phases of having different types of beings and different types of abductions. And I believe we're being visited constantly by different races from different records, if you like, on that level. And that is why you get differing accounts, and that is why you will get some people that will say, I never felt threatened, I felt, it was good, and then you'll get others who were terrified. Because E.T. being on the same path that we're on, even if they're 1,000 years in front of us, they have to still do the same thing. So, is it a bizarre act of kindness that E.T. do not allow us to remember the whole of the experience? You get a lot of abductees that say, I saw a vehicle at the side of the road, or I just saw a light, or I saw an owl. That's another common one. And what they try and do, because as humans we try to rationalise things anyway, which was normal, to help you cope with, as a coping mechanism, and to carry on with life as you would normally. Therefore, E.T. will try and substitute a memory that's more acceptable. And if you think on everything, every thought that you have is an energy. Energy is constant. It's around us all the time, and it just transfers from one to another. So if you're giving off an energy, E.T. is able to read that energy. And that is why you've often heard of abductees that were visited again and again. Even Calvin Parker, now the Pascagoula incident, Calvin only naturally remembered the one incident, which was the first famous incident when he was with Charlie Hickson, that happened in 1973. But recently, he was hypnotically regressed by Kath Marden, and he had 4 encounters, 2 when he was younger, and 2 more recently, and one of which he remembers. Now, Calvin couldn't remember the others, and I believe that they are able to control completely what you do or do not remember. And there was one instance where I investigated a case from UFO back in the 90s, and it was 4 adults that had been abducted. And one of the guys said it was a very odd atmosphere. My memory's not right. He says I can remember thinking, without regression or anything, but he can remember thinking suddenly how it was dark, and he couldn't remember twilight or dusk or anything. It was daylight, then it was dark. But he said, if you imagine your memory as a videotape, and then it being cut into different lengths, and then some of the tape being completely discarded, and others maybe even put back in the wrong order. So you don't, he says, your memory isn't right. It's like it's been tampered with. Mm-hmm. And that got me to thinking, that's why,
right. Well, I find this absolutely fascinating. Is there any, I mean, you've covered so much material in such a short amount of time. I mean, wow. So all of this information is in your book, and
Yep.
This goes into quite detail, though, in your book, of course, right?
Yeah, one thing that I've tried to do, Zoe, was put the ideas out there I've covered a lot of things in the book. What I've tried to do is show that where people, and I'm not decrying it, because there are some fabulous researchers out there with fantastic brains that do really good investigative work and come to really good conclusions. But within the field of ufology, you tend to get people that may just do a book about Roswell, or they'll do a book about Rendlesham Forest, or they'll do a book about, Lonnie Zamora and the Socorro incident. And they tend to just be little pieces of the pie. And what I've tried to do is show that it's not just little pieces of the pie. This whole thing is connected. And if you understand the basics of how it's connected, then it may help people in their investigations and conclusions, but it also helps people to think outside that box that there really is a lot more to it.
Right, and obviously there is, and that's what you're bringing across in this book by everything we just discussed and more.
Yeah, that's correct.
So,
It's something that I've sort of, with my own experience on both the paranormal and UFOs, that I don't know, sort of been steered that way. I don't think anything ever happens by accident. There's no such thing as coincidence. Everything happens for a reason. And our personal experiences in our lives and your environment colour how you think and how you deal with people and how you interpret things. Therefore, it's just how I've interpreted things over the last 50 years. And to me, now, one of the saying is, I'm a Yorkshireman, so I'm always right. But at the moment, I think I'm on the right lines. I may be proved wrong, and if I am, then so be it. But it ticks all the boxes and does put everything, I'm not saying it's 100% by any stretch of the imagination, but it does make sense and it does connect everything together.
well, I think it's really important that people read this instead of a book on just, like we're not just talking about being abducted today, we're not just talking about being experimented on. That's like you were saying, like the Rendlesham Forest, or there's many other books that are out there, and most of them are on that subject. What you're talking about is a totally different subject, and it's quite unusual, and I think most people are going to find this quite unusual to learn about your approach. It would be more of your approach on what exactly is going on.
Yeah. You see, one of the other things, we'll carry on, you just mentioned abductions again. If I expand that a little further, if you imagine somebody that can control the electromagnetic spectrum, one of the things that we constantly hear from abductees, now you get it in other things as well, like with cryptids and Bigfoot, that sort of thing, but you often get abductees and people that experiences that have complete silence. And it's not just quiet, it is complete silence. There's nothing whatsoever. There's no background hum of traffic in the distance or wind in the air or the birds in the trees. There's nothing. And that's because they're temporarily being tuned out of their normal acoustic spectrum, so they can't hear it. And they can't hear it because they're not there. And I also believe that we have an inbuilt, how we have the fight or flight syndrome, which people are familiar with on a normal reaction to something that you're not happy with. Another deep-seated thing which we may have subconsciously, but both with the paranormal and in the field of ufology, is occasionally people will say they feel this visceral terror, this absolute terror at what they're experiencing. And I think that could come down to a subconscious thing where your body realizes, your soul, if you like, realizes that you're in a place or in a vibration or on a different record to where you should be. And it recognizes that, and that's why you get that, I should be running away from this because I'm not vibrating where I should be vibrating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, okay, so the fight or flight, you're saying, that's very interesting. That captivated my attention because, I mean, and this is totally off the subject, but people that are under high stress right now, it's really fight or flight is really what that's about. So explain that again, like if you're a person and you're going through that, because you're speaking about so much that my mind is reeling, but you're hitting on certain subjects. So if something was, let's just say a person that was going through fight or flight, if they had an old, are you talking about an old memory? Or what are you talking about, the fight or flight? I didn't quite get that.
Oh, it's a medical term. If you're in a situation where you're medically injured or you get into a fight, your body will automatically produce adrenaline to help you either fight or run away. That's why it's called the fight or flight reflex. Your body produces adrenaline to help you either run away or fight for your survival. And that's a natural body reaction that you can't control. And I'm saying this is the same, but on a vibratory level, on the level of your soul, where your soul recognizes that you are straying out of your normal vibration where you should be. And so at a deeper level, it recognizes that you shouldn't be there.
So how does one get to their normal vibration of where they're supposed to be if they're in fight or flight? How does somebody get back to normal again? Let's just say they're having that experience every day. I'm just bringing this in just because of everybody's going through so much stress right now. So it's either fight or flight. So how does someone get into that equilibrium? Does that come in anywhere in the context of your book or in your own philosophy?
No, that's just what naturally happens when you're backed into a corner.
Okay.
That's what. So if you remove yourself from that situation, your body will settle back down, your adrenaline levels will go back to normal, and your blood pressure reduces, and your pulse goes back down again, and you settle down and you're more relaxed. It's only when you're actually in the situation that everything's sort of up at that level, which enables you to either fight or run away. And I think on the electromagnetic level, that is exactly what happens when people feel this terror, because suddenly the soul, if you wish to call it that, is aware that you're entering a different frequency, a different vibration. And that's sometimes, if you just say, people feel this when they see spirits sometimes. We've also got lots of reports for that, and also lots of reports when people have seen Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and that's the same. Some of them say, I just felt absolute terror,
Okay.
And that is because I think, again, Bigfoot is on a different dimension to us.
Right, exactly. That's what I believe too. So he's a different record, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So it would just be a different record. I believe that too. So
Yeah.
is there anything else that you could think of that you would like to discuss about your book? Because, I mean, Paul, I'm overwhelmed. When we first talked, I was so overwhelmed. I was trying to understand everything you have, because I've always just read the books on just someone's story. I never read anything that's more kind of scientific approach like you're doing, but also bringing in some spiritual nature into it somehow. You're kind of bringing it all together into one thing.
Yeah. Well, this is where I think people need to see the big picture. And it's not that I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist, and I've tried to write the book as just a way of showing people in layman's terms that makes it easy to understand. And my idea was, by introducing people to this as a concept, then they could go off and do their own research, and maybe it would help them. I don't know.
Right.
But it's just getting the point across in terms that people can understand.
Right, exactly, in a written form, which I think is better to to read the book, okay? Because if you don't understand something, then you can go back and reread it again and really catch what you're saying. So this is a totally different concept that I'm just blown away on, and actually would love to read the book. I haven't read it yet, of course, because it just came out, and you can find the book on Amazon.com, UFO, The Real Story. Okay, everybody? So, is there anything else that you would like to add to your interview today, since I'm overwhelmed?
Well, don't be. I mean,
Beautiful.
so you're welcome to ask me questions anytime. And if any of the listeners, I do have the book is out, by the way, in paperback as an ebook, and now it's available as audio. So
Excuse me. Boo-boo. Okay, sorry. We had
it's okay.
a
So you can
barking
get
dog.
to this.
Okay, go ahead. Start again.
That
Start
was another
again.
realm.
I'll start again. The book is available as a paperback, as an ebook, and also it's out today as an audio book. So for the
Nice.
lazy types like me that can just put it in the car and listen to it a bit while you're going somewhere, that's a good result. But I also have a page on Facebook called It's the Real Story, and I put a lot of things on that, plus my experiences, plus if I'm out doing night watches, and I've got videos, which I've taken videos of UFOs, photographs of UFOs, and anything like that, I'll just add on to the page.
Well, I know that's incredible. I went on your Facebook page and clicked that I liked it. And do you have to be invited to that, or can anyone just join?
No, anybody can just go on that. That's
Okay.
fine. I've made it open to allow people to go on and make comments or whatever they wish.
Okay. Well, I think we got everything that you wanted to speak about. Now, did you have any, I know that there's a lot of the very interesting things about you, but you also had some interesting we had some interesting discussions on the paranormal. And you had one about sitting in the garden that we discussed. And around the corner, there was something in the alleyway. Do you remember that?
When I was down the mine?
Well, there was one that was down the mine, and there was another where there was a couple people who looked down the alleyway. But anyways, down the mine, that's very cool one. So why don't you talk about that for a second? Because that was a very unique paranormal experience. Actually,
Yeah. Well, anyone that has previously worked down the mine, when I left nursing, I went into the occupational health nurse for our mining industry. And after a few years, you get bored with being in the medical centre. So I asked if I could go underground and work underground. And they put me with a road laying team, which was basically laying the railroad tracks for the mines. So when they break through into a new area, and then they take all the machinery out, so it was heavy work. And what we used to do was, down in the mines throughout the UK then, everybody stopped. The whole mine just stopped for lunch. Everybody stopped, everybody had lunch, then the coal belts would start up again and everybody went back to work. So our job was quite manually hard work and hot and dusty. So we used to go through the air doors that developed for connecting the roadway through to the intake side where the air was coming in. So it was much cooler, clean, fresh air. And they used to generally put the more elderly of the employees out there, maybe somebody that had been injured or the older ones who didn't want to retire yet, and they would monitor the belts carrying the coal out of the mine. So we'd finished out at lunchtime. I'd gone through to have my sandwich with this old guy sat on this belt. Everything's quiet and still. We're down the mine, and then coming towards us as we both sat there eating our sandwiches was this old miner. And he walked towards us. He didn't acknowledge us at all, but he walked towards us. And then where one conveyor belt transferred onto another, the roadway was quite high, maybe 15, 20 feet. And to one side of it was a heading, not long, maybe 20 yards long and maybe 20 feet wide. And he went into the heading, and it was where they used to put all the switchgear for the districts, the new areas where there'd be electrical transformers. So he went through there, and we thought he was just checking the seals, because all these were sealed off. And he'd be just checking the seals to make sure there's no gases leaking out of the old workings. And after we watched him go under, after a minute, he didn't come back. 2 minutes, he didn't come back, and it was like, what's he doing in there? You know, I hope he hasn't had a blooming heart attack or something like that. So we both jumped up and went through underneath the belt into this heading, and there was nobody there. Now we looked around, nobody anywhere. And we both, I mean, we looked at each other and it was like, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And we'd both seen this old guy quite clearly. And there was nobody there. Now, had it been as we are now outside, where people can just go anywhere they want, down a mine, you can't go anywhere. You can only stay on the roadways because you're surrounded by solid rock. So there's no way that this guy could have got back out and past us without us seeing him. So it was obvious, or it became obvious, retrospectively, that we'd both seen a ghost, we'd seen a spirit. You know?
Right.
And it was like, whoa, you know.
Wow.
But it was really clear, and we weren't afraid, you know, it was like, it was after when we realised what we'd seen, and it was like, my goodness, you know.
Right.
Okay.
Now, okay, so that was one story that was really good, and I know that you have several more, but this today, speaking, we're trying to stay on the subject of your book. I mean, this has just been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, this interview, I mean, you're just so prepared, and I haven't actually had anybody before that can speak the way you did, and just me just pretty much sit here and not really answer any questions because I'm so mesmerized and baffled at what you're saying. And so I just want to say thank you so much for coming
You're
on
very
today
welcome.
and explaining your story. So everybody, let's go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and explain again one more time where everyone can find you, your book, and where they can find you, and all the different, you know, Facebook. Why don't you just go ahead and review that for us?
Okay, well, the book is available now on Amazon by Flying Disc Press, and it's available as a paperback, available as an ebook, and now available as an audio book too. And then I also have my own page on Facebook, and that's It's the Real Story, all lowercase, It's the Real Story. And put that in and you'll see all the, and if you scroll down the posts, I've put photographs on, videos on, and everything else, because I have taken quite a few photographs of UFOs, things, and when I've managed to, I mean, this is something, so just last week, my wife and I were in the garden, and she has a big swing in the garden, and I made her a shelter for it that was waterproof. And we sat there, middle of the afternoon, beautiful blue sunshine, not a cloud in the sky, and I saw a brilliant, and I mean brilliant, pinpoint or bluey white light. It was just like you could see I mean the magnitude of it must have been tremendous, because you could see it through the blue sky. The only thing that was actually visible in the sky, without looking at the sun, was you could just see the moon. But this light went really bright, only tiny, and then disappeared again, and then came back. Now, because we were sat on the swing that I'd made the shelter around it, I was able to move to one side so that I could line it up to convince myself whether it was moving or not. And it wasn't moving, it was perfectly stationary, and it was fading in and going bright again and then fading away again. And I got my wife to come over, and she saw it as well. And it was only in sight for maybe 5 minutes, but I even had time to go and get my camera, but the camera wouldn't focus on it because it was basically just the blue sky that it was seeing. So I couldn't even take a picture, wouldn't allow me to take a picture of it, if you like.
Well, you know what, I just wanted to bring this in. I watched a documentary of a man that basically was this UFO guy, and what he was saying, basically the documentary was, anybody can see a UFO. All you have to do is look in the sky, and eventually you're going to see a UFO. So after I got done watching that show, I was at 7-Eleven, and I went outside waiting for my partner to get outside, and I was just looking up in the sky with my soda, just staring at the sky, and lo and behold, out of the cloud darted a round figure, and it just darted straight out, stopped, and then it went down, straight down, and then as it just hovered there for a second, and then it went directly into another cloud, and I saw a UFO. Now, not just that, but my grandfather, I was telling you about my grandfather that had that amazing sighting of the UFO, where he owned a turkey farm, and he's, you know, a cowboy, grew up, you know, walking, you know, to school in the snow and horses and all that, and he's a real cowboy. Now, he went into the turkey farm that day, and all the turkeys were gobbling and looking up into the sky, so he looked up, and lo and behold, there was a UFO maybe 100 feet above him. He said it was absolutely huge, a big silvery disc with a beautiful small teeny flame that came out the back. Not a flame, but iridescent, kind of a bluish, purplish, pinkish, like tailpipe, he called it, or something that came out. The second he looked up, and it was right above his head, it took off, and he could not see it anymore. But my grandfather is not one to tell anybody about this story or to imagine anything like that, because of course he doesn't believe in it. He's into horses and raising turkeys, and you know, he goes to the Christian church, and so this just absolutely blew my mind. I've had my experience with extraterrestrial coming to visit me, so that was my own experience. But so I've had experiences as well, and I just wanted to kind of share that with you, why I'm so interested in UFOs and learning about UFOs as well, and especially with your type of book, that would make more sense to me to read than it would be to just read about just a general book on an abductee or just a general story. So I like your philosophy, and I can't wait to read the book. I'm going to get it. And is there anything else, lastly, that you would like to bring up about anything?
Well, I've just, while you were on talking about abductees there, just one thing to explain to the listeners real easy was, if you imagine E.T. being in complete control of the electromagnetic spectrum, that is why they can, if you like, for want of a better word, hone in on somebody to pick them. That's why E.T. can suddenly appear at the side of the bed. That's why E.T. can float people out through the wall or through a door even though it's closed. It's irrelevant, because they're tuning you up to their level to suit them.
Okay.
So the wall and the door and whatever isn't there. You're in a different place altogether.
Okay, I get it. Because mine, it was like a two-story building peering through a window, so there's no way it could be standing on the ground. It was just shoulder level and up, staring at me through the window, so that would make sense. It's just on a different vibrational level of where they are able to do things like this, where we can't, and then we don't understand it, and then if we see something like that, we go through the flight or flight. That's where we're at in our consciousness.
Yeah.
Well, it's been, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say, yeah, that's very interesting, and it's just putting things over in a language or in a way that people understand, and not making it too scientific, because a lot of people go into a lot of depth and try to, what can I say, they try to justify how their thinking works. And you don't need to do that. To me, everything that I've said is just common sense. It's just, everything explains everything else. And it's something I've gradually come to be aware of. And that's why I wanted to write the book and get this idea out to people, that don't make things more complicated than you need to, because it isn't, you know.
Fantastic. I love that. I love that as our closing on that. So I just want to say thank you so much for being on today and explaining your concept of something that's totally different that I have never heard of, but makes sense. Okay, it makes sense. It's overwhelming, but it makes sense to me. So you really have to think as you're speaking. So I'm over here thinking, and I can't ask any questions because I'm thinking too much.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. So thank you, Paul. I really appreciate you being on, and
Very well.
we'll be posting this as soon as we can, and we're going to say bye-bye. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.